Cleary Summit is perhaps Alaska's most recognizable lost ski area. Indeed, 3 decades after it closed, it's in remarkably good condition. The runs are still visible on the mountain, and the lower T-bar is in surprisingly good condition. So, what's the story behind this lost mountain? In this video, we'll take a deep dive into Cleary Summit's history. Without further ado, let's dive into this video. Cleary Summit is located around 30 minutes north of the city of Fairbanks, Alaska. Located on the East Highway, it's directly adjacent to the currently operating Skiland ski and snowboard area. Downhill skiing at Cleary Summit dates all the way back to the 1940s. Back then, skiers would make the drive to the end of the highway to ski the current Cleary Summit area. Trips to this region were quite popular, and the first downhill ski races at Cleary Summit were actually held in 1941. In 1949, Bob and Sylvia McCann, as well as Link Imson, leased the Cleary Summit land from the North Star Borough. They installed a 1,300-foot rope tow on the lower T-bar line that year. They also built a small lodge, which burnt down in 1953. This prompted the construction of another small lodge, which would subsequently burn down in 1956. While the lodge was rebuilt that year, a second rope tow above the highway was also added, opening up more terrain. In the early days of skiing at Cleary Summit, the East Highway was only plowed to the ski resort. This facilitated top-to-bottom skiing over the highway, at least until more of the road became plowed later on. Cleary Summit quickly became the largest commercial ski resort in Alaska, drawing fair crowds every weekend. With 2,550 feet of elevation and built on a north slope, Cleary Summit usually was able to remain open until April, when its competitors in the town of Fairbanks were not. Alaska was thought of at this time to be the world's next big ski destination, which even brought French lift manufacturer Jean Pommelski to Cleary Summit in 1958. In 1958, Cleary Summit incorporated as a public company and offered local Fairbanks residents the opportunity to purchase stock. Reportedly, this was used to finance a new T-bar. While it was reported that the lift would be built by Palma, it was not. In August of 1959, construction of the new $36,000 T-bar was underway, which officially opened in December of 1960. This lift was truly the backbone of the resort, and though it was retrofitted by Doppelmayr a few years later, the original bones of the lift ran until the closure. In 1962, Skiland was built right beside Cleary Summit. For most of the life of Cleary Summit, Skiland was quite underdeveloped, boasting 2 rope tows and with the lodge being built from a repurposed USSR mining camp building. It was also in 1962 that Cleary Summit's lodge went up in flames. This was started by a cigarette left on a fat couch. The fire led to the building of the iconic Cleary Summit Lodge, which lasted far longer than its predecessors did. Cleary Summit also installed a beginner J-bar serving the beginner slope. Skiland closed for a number of years in the 1960s, leaving Cleary Summit as the only public option, as Birch Hill was military only. Cleary Summit thrived in this time, teaching countless kids how to ski and hosting countless races. In 1972, Skiland reopened under new ownership. While the two mountains were in heavy competition, Cleary Summit was definitely the more built-up mountain. The lodge had a full restaurant which served wine, and the lifts were all modern. Skiland only boasted a shack that sold snacks and 2 steep rope tows. Skiland also heavily relied on volunteers to keep the organization running. Modernization at Cleary Summit continued in 1972 when the resort replaced the upper mountain rope tow with a new Doppelmayr T-bar. By 1976, the J-bar had been replaced with a Doppelmayr Platter. Cleary Summit really didn't change much after the 1970s. While Bob McCann contemplated installing a used chairlift in 1986, he chose to pass, stating that the population was unable to support that kind of an investment. Instead, McCann chose to install a snowmaking system, which was fed from a deep well. It was also around this time that Tom McCann took over operations from Bob McCann. In 1991, Birch Hill installed a new riblet double. Skiland also announced that they had purchased a $250,000 Mueller double from Silverstar and intended to install it that year. This worried Tom McCann, who stated that the Fairbanks ski market was already oversaturated and that it couldn't support everyone. More bad news came for Tom McCann when the military allowed civilian access to Birch Hill in 1993. Additionally, Moose Mountain opened to the public in 1993 after years of negotiating with the city of Fairbanks. It was in this environment that Tom McCann announced the closure of Cleary Summit in October of 1994. Razor-thin profit margins, rising insurance, aging facilities, and an abundance of competition spelled doom on Fairbanks' oldest ski hill. The upper T-bar and Platter were sold to Hilltop, Alaska, though only the Platter was installed. The lodge sat vacant, surprisingly intact, until it was lit on fire and burned down in 2008. Today, the ski trails sit remarkably preserved on the mountain. Much of the lower T-bar still stands as a testament and memento to the ski hill that started it all. As mentioned earlier, Cleary Summit was much more mellow than its competitor Skiland. The Stees Highway divided Cleary Summit into two sections. The larger lower mountain had the base lodge as well as the parking lot. The main T-bar was around 2,800 feet long and had an elevation gain of 597 feet. This lift was undoubtedly the center of the lift fleet at Cleary Summit and served all the lower runs. There was also a beginner Platter lift which only serviced one green run and also provided access to the day lodge. The beginner run the Platter served was fairly mellow, with a maximum slope gradient of only 19%. The run was fairly wide and it looks like an ideal beginner run. Right below it, there were several options the skier could take. Cook's Tour was one of the longer runs at Cleary Summit, bringing the skier down and winding around to the base of the T-bar. Cook's Tour ran the skier all the way down, and it provided egress for several other runs. Chicago was another green run, and though most of it was mild, it got significantly steep near the merge with Cook's Tour. Tree Trail was another blue run that looks like it could have skied top to bottom using the Bobolink run. Bobolink was one of the main runs on the mountain, running from the lodge to the mid-mountain. Skiers could take either the crossover blue run or go down the Wildcat Black run. Wildcat, like the other runs here, wasn't overly steep, though it reaches a 52-degree pitch near the bottom. Moving right along, the Exhibition Black run ran down the T-bar for most of its length, eventually turning into the Timberline Blue run. Alright, let's discuss Cleary Summit's advanced terrain. The majority of the advanced terrain existed in a short but steep gully, all winding down to one intermediate run. University was a top-to-bottom intermediate trail and was not overly steep. The McCall run followed the T-bar almost its entire length and was the only way to access most of the expert terrain. McCall was moguled its entire length and would have been a leg burner, though it's not as steep in pitch as other runs are. The only runs McCall did not immediately serve were Cabin Trail and Busch Garden. These two runs are quite short in length, though they can get quite steep in certain sections. Newsboy, Easter, and Skip It were all accessed from McCall, with Newsboy being the steepest and Skip It being the least steep. Easter also looks to be quite narrow, and I have to imagine these runs would have been moguled. Finally, Grimy Gulch starts at the highway and runs to the top section of University. Because the highway was not originally plowed past Cleary Summit in its early days, I have to imagine that this run was skiable from the upper mountain. Speaking of which, let's briefly discuss the upper mountain. A 1,600-foot-long Doppelmayr T-bar serviced two trails here, which looked like they were mostly clear from trees. Ridge Run was a green trail that wound the skier past the border down to the base. The bowl was labeled as black, and as the name applies, was void of trees. As I mentioned before, I have to imagine that the skier was able to ski down to Grimy Gulch or University before the road was plowed past the ski hill. Cleary Summit is quite the unique place. Its story always intrigued me, and it's interesting that it was the same family who saw it through its entire life. Skiing in Fairbanks is still quite prominent, though its history really starts with Cleary Summit in 1949. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. And until next time, this is Skier72.